Next, we'll move to our panel discussion, generously sponsored by tranScrip. The topic is one that's crucial to deal making. What happens after the deal is signed? How should the deal making parties interact post deal to maximise value creation going forward? Moderating this discussion is Rienk Pypstra, Chief Medical Officer and Head of Infectious Disease at tranScrip. He will lead the panel of experts as they dive into the key considerations for delivering value from deals, whether they are focused on investment, R&D, outsourcing. Let's welcome Rienk and the panel to the stage.
Thank you very much. After this fascinating presentation about everything that can happen and the mergers and acquisitions that we can expect in 2025, we're here today to discuss how, after the deal making, we can ensure that the collaboration works well. I've got here a panel of people with experience in not only deal making, but also trying to run the collaboration afterwards. And I would like to start with a brief introduction by all the panel members so that you know who's where. Can we start it at the end there?
Hello, good morning everyone. So Jenny Laird, I'm from Eli Lilly. I'm a vice president in our neuroscience organization. We have 4 big therapeutic areas: neuroscience, metabolic disease, or diabetes metabolism, you heard a little bit about already, oncology and immunology. And my role in neuroscience is I lead our external innovation, so BD essentially for neuroscience, globally, a global team. But also, because I'm sitting inside the neuroscience organization, I have, sometimes we do the deal and I've ended up leading the internal project that results from it. So and my background is PhD neuroscientist, and I did 20-something years doing drug discovery and drug development as it were, indoor scientist. So at Merck, first of all, as an academic, then at AstraZeneca for 10 years. And all of that time, I was running internal portfolio, leading departments, and so on and so on. But in my role at Lilly, joined Lilly Ventures, and then doing this external innovation role, now I'm an outdoor scientist. So I've seen both sides of the fence.
Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Louise Jopling, and I'm recently Chief Scientific and Innovation Officer at Babraham Research Campus. We're one of the campuses just south of Cambridge, and we are a hub of the place to be for setting up and scaling biotech and bioscience companies, from shared lab equipment facilities through to large scale-up companies of in excess of 150 people. And my background is as an immunologist by training. I've worked in academia, biotech, medium and large size pharma, and probably for the last 12, 13 years, I have been in that external innovation space. So I was leading immunology scouting efforts across Europe, Middle East and Africa for Johnson & Johnson Innovation, and most recently working with industry partners across the spectrum of health technologies to help sell into the NHS and other global healthcare systems.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Bradley. I'm an IP and commercial solicitor at Penningtons, Manches, based in Cambridge. I spent some time working in-house as a deal lawyer, as a transactional lawyer at AstraZeneca. Had some great experience there in working with all manner of deals, collaborations, licensing, clinical study deals, combination product deals, setting up joint labs. So I've had a lot of experience of working in-house and kind of with counterparties, small biotechs, research institutes, universities. And then since then being outside in law firm, also had great experience of doing deals, but for smaller kind of different entities. So for kind of small to medium-sized biotechs, collaborations, licensing, but also acting for medical research charities, universities and research institutes. So kind of seen deals from both sides of the fence.
Hello, my name is Lehmann. I'm Director of Business Development and Partnerships at Astex Pharmaceuticals, which is based in Cambridge. Astex Pharmaceuticals is an early stage drug discovery company. So we, in the Cambridge site, we do not take things into the clinic. And so partnerships and collaborations, early stage research and development collaborations are absolutely intrinsic to the way that Astex works. We cannot function by ourselves. I've got a lot of experience of working in various types of early stage research collaborations, both from the university side, from the third-party service provider side, and also from the industry side. So I think I've seen it from all different angles, as pros and cons of being on both sides. So I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Hi, I'm Anji Miller. I'm a senior partner at LifeArc within the academic engagement team. My background is advanced therapies, and for the last 20 years, I've been working with academic-derived technologies, and that's whether it's in partnership or alone. The idea is to just get it to the patient. All the entities that I've worked with, whether that be LifeArc or academic establishments, has been to push translational research forward. So I'm looking forward to discussing this.
And finally, hello, I'm Jane Winter. I am an executive consultant at Seuss Plus. We specialise in setting up or supporting biotechs and investment companies to set up and navigate the complexities of vendor relationships. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry over 40 years, held senior positions both within pharma and in CROs. I suppose I'm coming at it today from very much having set up within large pharma, very large strategic vendor relationships, and also managing and leading those relationships on behalf of very large global CROs. But I've also got quite a lot of experience of helping biotechs set up relationships and step into particularly their clinical research environment and making sure that their first steps, particularly into phase 1, are successful. And I suppose today, given the fact that, as Mike said, 75% of new products coming onto the market do have a constituent from the biotech industry, we have to get these deals, or these deals have to be successful for ultimately our customers, the patients. So looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you. Very diverse panel. And just for the sake of completeness, a few words about my background. So I've been in clinical development for the last 30 years in the UK, Switzerland, US, ranging between big pharma, startups, biotech. So I've seen it from both sides as well, how deals can be made and how deals can be managed and how they can go wrong as well. And so today we would like to go over 4 different stages of the deal and executing the deal. It is, what do you do to be prepared up front? What do you do at kickoff? And then early on in the relationship, and thereafter the boring maintenance that needs to be managed as well. But before we engage into discussing what can be done, and I would like to invite the panel for an anecdote about something that went wrong, but preferably something funny, just to get going. Anybody who wants to kickstart?
I can talk about
Okay.
when I was in-house, and I guess this just goes to make sure legal agreements are clear and easy to read. So I was picking up a document in relation to kind of a collaboration that had been signed many years before. There were many questions around, okay, we're going to deprioritize this program and maybe sell it on, but what actually are the implications of that? Who owns the IP? What what would happen on sale. And actually, the document itself was incredibly long. The clauses were incredibly long, detailed, too long to understand. And actually, the reason why it's slightly amusing is because, and it just goes to show that, you know, obviously people change, the deal team changes, the kind of personnel who kind of were involved at the start, you know, doing the deal were different. But the deal lawyer was still there, actually. And there was a particular clause that I asked them about, what really was the intention of this very long clause? What were you trying to get at? And they just couldn't remember it. So I think that just goes to show, and part of what I'll mention today on the panel is just, you know, obviously getting things right in terms of the collaboration in the documentation and drafting things clearly, which is what I endeavour to do in my contracts, of course.
Excellent. Anybody else?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just in the context of in the microbiome space, we were that was leading a deal in that, and it was very ambiguous as to what the product would be at the end of the day. We were all planning for success, and in essence, as the scientific lead, I worked with the scientist on the biotech company's side of things. And then I had a transactor supporting me, and equally they had a BD person. And in essence, the science, so I always start with the science, but that's because that's inherent to me. And it started to unravel, and it had been going on and arguing and debating what success looked like, what these molecules may or may not be, and what the product might be at the end of the day. And it really, the transactors basically started just going in on each other. And sort of metaphorically speaking, I had to just bang their heads together. But how I approached that, because it was literally, we'd been working on this negotiation for probably about 10 months. And it was a case of we needed to rip off the Band-Aid. The scientific teams wanted to do the deal, and we were just getting caught up with two particular characters just being very stubborn. And in essence, I just needed to call it out. So just contacted the CEO and just had a conversation and said, look, if we're going to do this deal, then we need to agree, do we still fundamentally believe in the science, and do we want to get this done? And the four of us then had to get onto a call, and it really was literally treating the negotiators as sort of naughty school children, but we did get the deal done. But it was all about planning for success, which you clearly need to do. But yeah, naughty school children.
Very nice example. Yeah, we'll hear that over and over. There's three aspects that will come back every time. There's the science and the project on number one. Then number two, there's people and culture and other soft factors. And number three, there's process and structures that can be put in place to accommodate everything. So those are the three fundamentals that we will come back to every time. But maybe we can now go into the sequence of the deal. And when we're discussing this, we made an analogy of a relationship. You start with courting, then you have the honeymoon phase, then you get the first kids, changes happen, and then it becomes a maintenance phase, which you need to make sure you keep it interesting. So in that very first phase, of courting, what are the things that we need to do? What are the prenuptial arrangements that need to be agreed before we get to signing the deal, in order to ensure that we can facilitate the running of the collaboration thereafter? And maybe I can start on this side here.
Yep. Okay, so over that first glass of wine, maybe in the bar, I think you've got to be able to share your vision, your goals, what each company is looking to get out of this deal. Okay, biotech may be small, pharma may be large, but you've got a valuable asset potentially, and pharma's got expertise and funds to help you develop that asset. So I think you've got to be very transparent. You've got to be very clear as to both of your expectations as to what you want to get out of this deal, basically. And the goals. What are those goals? Articulate those goals. What are the similarities? But what are the differences? And can those differences be, are they compatible, or are there areas of risk? Because this is at the stage where you're starting to think, do I want to marry this guy long term, or is this just a one-night stand, basically? So I think I'll leave it at that.
Not that I have lots of experience of one-night stands, but and it would be champagne, not wine. I agree with everything that's been said, but I do think also, you mentioned before culture, and if you're talking about an arrangement between different sectors, I think it's important also to really outline the process and the challenges that possibly could be there. I think it's not only just, okay, what's the goal, but I think understanding each other. So understanding, for example, academia is peculiar, and it will always be that way. For someone who works in industry, you can move much faster, but there's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy that goes on within academia. So things are not going to move at the same speed. So I think, yes, you can have the shared goals and shared vision, but if you're not transparent with regards to managing expectations with how things are going to progress, you are going to become a cropper as well. So.
Anybody else who wants to add to that? Essential elements before signing the deal. Jenna.
Yeah. So I think it is, as my colleagues on the panel here have already talked about, making sure you understand the scope of what you're aiming at. But I think especially, I'm obviously talking from the big pharma side, and when you looking at things where we got off to perhaps not the most ideal start, sometimes in terms of structuring a deal, it's that focusing on making the pie as big as possible as your first output. What could this be? What possibilities do you have, and not limiting those, right? Because sometimes people get very hung up on their proportion of the pie. So if you say, we definitely need to have a deal split of whatever it is, we absolutely need to hold on to 30% of this or 60%, whatever it is, rather than thinking, well, what could we do to make the whole thing much bigger? Because in the end, obviously, 50% of a small amount of money is a lot less than maybe 10% of something where you make it really big. So, and also the other key thing which kind of feeds into that is, what are your capabilities on both sides? What can you actually deliver? That's one step. What can you deliver? But who is the best place to deliver specific things? Because again, a biotech may well be able to, run a phase 2 trial, but are they going to run it as quickly? Do they maybe want to focus their resources on something else and hand it over to a large pharma partner? So this business of giving up some degree of control and giving up, or not restricting what the scope is going to be up front, going with an open mind and work together to try and make it as big as possible. Because then you can often end up with a much more productive deal, and both sides, because the ideal deal is one where both sides can go back to their respective stakeholders and explain what a great deal we've got. Both sides should feel they're winning. So you need to find the place where you can.
I think it's mapping out what success could look like and what those critical success factors are, so that manages expectations as well. I might be straying into that sort of the next stage that you wanted to cover, but I think this very much, we can develop a research plan, or this is the research and the science that we want to conduct, but when is that point that we say this is a key decision point, and how do we make that decision? And so really clearly defining those critical success factors up front has really helped on a number of deals that I've been involved with.
I'd say in terms of the documentation side, which I guess is where I get involved in that prenup piece, it's probably having some sensible heads of terms in place once you've decided those aspects before you go into the actual deal negotiation. Some of the key points, the commercials, not making them too long, 1 or 2 pages should be enough really to kind of set that out, but it does make things a lot easier when you get into the negotiations.
So a matter of scope and vision, and then complemented with setting expectations where both partners really agree what the expectations are. I think that's absolutely key indeed. Now, we haven't discussed the type of structures and processes that we would need to have in place when the deal starts off. Anybody who wants to comment on that?
I think as a starting point, number one, I would very much recommend you, within both parties, identify an executive sponsor that is really going to help particularly unstick issues within the companies when you start work together. I think executive sponsorship can be very useful. The other part of kind of a process, and again, we use it within clinical research and any kind of relationship, is governance. Setting up an appropriate governance structure for this particular deal. Again, these can be very complex or they can be very simple, but it's a framework in which you can operate, come together, understand how to communicate, sort out issues, escalate issues, and look at risk. So I think a governance structure, appropriate, don't overcomplicate it. And also I would recommend that is written down somewhere and approved by both parties, because again, it then holds weight, basically, that this is how you're going to operate. And again, making sure that you've understood all of the kind of people that are involved in that team within the governance structure.
Absolutely, I absolutely echo that. A governance structure is really commonly part of the contract, and it should really be well communicated by both sides who and why this governance structure exists, and that governance structure's role, and that what sort of decisions they're expected to be making with regards to the collaboration, because that can often get, in the excitement of getting it all done, the role of that, they can, especially when it's a very early stage collaboration, sometimes these sort of JSC members and so on can get a little bit too stuck into the science, and it's really important to make sure that you retain that your JSC or JRC have that bird's eye view of the strategy of what was originally agreed, and they don't end up going down scientific rabbit holes and so on, and they have that understanding of the framework of the agreement. What were those original goals in the prenup? Where are we on that? And it's okay if everything doesn't go to plan, because we've all got experience of things that don't go quite to plan, but knowing who to turn to when it doesn't go to plan, so we can start to make a variant to the plan is key.
Escalation.
Absolutely, escalation. Hopefully, one always tries to not use the escalation procedure, but it's important to have one in place, I think.
I think join in on that. It's good. It's very important to define your governance, but you don't want to nail yourself down too closely, because having a little bit of flexibility is extremely useful. You don't want to find yourself in breach of contract because you failed to have, 3 JSC meetings a year, and that's what the contract said, and now you're in breach. And of course, usually a breach, I'm sure you can tell us this, triggers all sorts of other stuff that wasn't at all your intention, just because you happen to fail to have one face. So you can make it as reasonable as possible in terms of what you actually put in the contract, but just be really clear who is responsible for what. And on that same thing, I think that you have really failed in your collaboration if you are fishing out the contract in order to have a discussion with somebody about who should be doing what. Yeah. It should be the last resort when things are really going, that's kind of like when you're calling the marriage counsellors or whatever in your analogy. So
We are stretching the
the
analogy.
ideal is that you get your deal structure and, you know, the people bit all sorted out and well established ahead of time, and then the contract reflects that, and then hopefully you never ever need to take it out the drawer if you've done a good job.
Absolutely, I definitely echo that, and I guess it's around the JPT structure, but then it's all around other things as well in terms of reporting requirements, milestones, you know, rights to carry on doing research by either party, publication policy, who owns the material outcomes, who owns the IP, and I guess it's kind of getting the input from all the different functions into that document so that you can get it right, and then when the deal is signed, I mean, you spend obviously a long time, well, hopefully not too long, negotiating the deal, so you want to get it right, and then when it is signed, yes, you can maybe make sure that everyone's kind of on board and knows basically what those roles are in terms of the JPT or publication, press release, etc. But then not having to look at the document is ideal. It's done and everyone knows what's in there. But yes, you ideally don't want to have to start claiming breach of contract. That's absolutely not ideal at all. That's going to be hopefully far from anyone's minds when they come into these things.
I think stakeholder analysis as well is a really important process to go through, particularly at the beginning. Biotech stakeholders may be a little different to pharma stakeholders, and what do those stakeholders influence on the deal, on the outcome, the success of the deal, but also what do you need to communicate to get them on side, basically. You know, particularly in biotech, maybe you've got a board of investors that you need to keep, you know, and you need to know what sort of information they need, because everybody that's informed that you communicate with will be on side, or hopefully on side. So I think stakeholder analysis is also an important sort of initial process to follow.
Thanks. So now we seem to be well prepared. We're signing the deal. And what's next? We're now in this honeymoon phase. We're coming together. We're going to make this work. What are the do's and don'ts in this early phase of collaboration? What are the pitfalls that we need to watch? Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay,
I
good.
mean, in the euphoria of
Yeah.
of it's all happening after everything, I think, you know, we mentioned before having all these things in place, but the reality is when you're moving forward, no one's going to pick out all these documents. So I think it's really having a team that is informed, and that's on both sides, so that whoever was there putting everything together and discussing, they really do communicate exactly what this is and what needs to be done, particularly in the time frame, and making sure that the team is appropriate to deliver. I think, you know, kickoff meetings, particularly in academia, we have a lot of those, and they're as well as really getting to know each other much better. It isn't a reminder and one voice going out to everyone to remind everyone exactly what this transaction is, what this collaboration is, what this marriage is, what to expect. Otherwise, it really is going to be a shock when, you know, a couple of months down, milestones are not being met or issues are coming up. So I think that's a clear thing. I think it's continuing the transparency, but I think it's being pragmatic. You can have how many different structures in place, but if it's too cumbersome, it's just not going to happen. And it really is, you know, wasting time half the time. So I think it's making sure that you really can deliver.
Yeah, and I think as well, I would absolutely echo that. I think it's really about, at the start, that kick-off meeting is so important. And if that can be done in person, that really does add a huge amount of weight. But I think, so in one of my roles in that external innovation space, a big part of my role was to stop the large corporate just sort of crawling all over the small biotech where maybe they were a very virtual two-person discovery engine. And I became that gatekeeper, or dragon, as some people decided to call me. But it was, let them get on and do their work. So I acted as that point of contact for the biotech company, but also for the larger organisation. And then it was at those appropriate time points, then we bring in those other experts to crawl all over, where they've got to in that particular function.
Yeah, in addition to the difference in culture, there's the difference in size.
Yeah.
That is often neglected.
And money can really balance that out, because all of a sudden it's a talk which with a tone that wasn't there before at the beginning, because you're contributing more or your resources, you have better resources. So it's,
And I think as well, teams are made of people, and people operate and think differently. And I think one of the things actually we do at Seuss is actually look at behaviours during the startup meeting, and look at kind of a sort of behaviour sort of index, basically, and where the various different team members sit on that sort of behaviour index. And again, that's useful because it's useful in terms of being able to understand how they communicate and how they make decisions, basically. So kind of looking at the team, because what you're trying to do is to get the best out of that team that you've pulled together from both biotech and from pharma.
Talking again about the difference in size between big companies, small companies, one of the things that you have to come up with a way of solving. I mean, there is this, protecting the small biotech from having their time totally eaten by talking to people from the larger organization. But equally, you need to understand that the larger organization will have lots of people who are experts in whatever it is they're going to, probably. For me, doing a neuroscience deal, you'll do a deal, it comes in, now it's part of Lilly's portfolio. Effectively, people really want to help. But we've got 600 neuroscientists spread across the world, and only a very small number of them will be even aware that the deal has been negotiated, because, you keep these things confidential and so on. So now there's a whole bunch of people keen to help, often with great deal of expertise, have no background at all in what it is that this collaboration is supposed to be about, or what the science was. Often it's confidential. So usually the big pharma has to come up with a way of kind of presenting the information that the biotech has. This is why we did it, this is what they're going to do, this is what they need from you. So we need a structure for doing that. But equally, the biotech needs to help us a little bit by letting us, hand over some of the information so we can, or they themselves come and give a talk, whatever, represent their science to the broader internal organisation, so that everyone can come, because there are probably all sorts of great ideas or technologies or things that the broader team could bring to the collaboration if only they knew the details. So but obviously it's a balance between the biotech. Sometimes they want to protect their platforms. So you've got to figure, and again, this all goes back to why it's so important at the beginning to really understand what your scope is and what your objectives are, so that when you get to that moment, you know what you want to share and to get the most from both sides.
So before we end this very interesting discussion, because the time is ticking and we get carried away, but I would like to go to the next stage, which is something goes wrong. We found some skeletons in the closet. The project is not as good as people had hoped. People are disappointing or are leaving. The A team is being replaced by the B team. All of those things happen after the initial euphoria phase. How do we react to that? How can we prevent that? Any advice from the panel?
I think that's where communication comes in. Communication and not sitting on issues, basically. I know I can remember one deal where we had to get the president of the company to come and sit at a table to work out the problem, basically, and no amount of emails is going to solve some of those issues. You've got to get round a table, or at least a virtual table, basically. And, like marriage guidance counselling, actually sometimes you can make a stronger relationship out of something that goes wrong, and actually form, because you've had to work out the issue together, and then basically understand each other in a lot more in depth, basically. So I think sometimes it's good to have issues because you have to work together to really resolve them.
I would say that no matter how advanced it is, you should have planned for some of these things because they are a risk. And with any good project, it would be milestones. So it would be based on the technology moving forward or certain expectations. So communication should be there all the time. It is also where if you are communicating and working together, some of these risks you will mitigate. So you will see that they're going to happen and you pivot or you do something else. Really with understanding, and this is something that we mentioned before, with understanding the drivers, understanding the needs, the backgrounds, expectations of each other. When something goes wrong, you should have an idea of how the other is going to respond. It's finding a solution so that someone doesn't just walk away and you can't progress anything.
Yep.
I do agree there are times where that could turn out better for one of the parties, but this is why you have to choose who you get in bed with wisely. Because the thing is, if things are going to go wrong and they're just going to get up and leave, then it's really where that's a bad partner in the first place. Ideally, what you'd want is that a solution be worked out because it's reminding each side exactly what the aim is. And a lot of the time, this would be for some intervention to have impact for society. If it means that, okay, the first thing that goes wrong, you're going to turn around and just walk away, maybe they're in the wrong business anyway. It's research, regardless of how advanced it is.
Good, thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think if I could just bring it back also to the human element and just slightly tiptoe back to the last stage of the sort of post-deal euphoria stage, and where you're all trying to get to know each other with these kick-off activities, and you're talking to each other much more in detail about what's going on and the sort of short-term plans. A lot of what you're doing at that stage, or one thing you should have in your mind, is that you are building bridges, and you should really start to build those bridges before you need them. And so not wait until a catastrophe to start to find out, okay, who is, the person on the other side. You should be, communication is so important for collaborations at all stages, sort of not just inter, but intra, and building those inter bridges before you need them is, I think, a really key part of what you need to be bearing in mind at the early stages, because things do go off the rails, and no matter how well you plan, there's always the possibility for something to come out from a strange angle. So yeah. Don't forget that human element as well to help you problem solve.
Flex appetite.
Just makes it much more easy to deal with on the ground, as it were.
Yeah. Rachel, you?
Yeah, absolutely. I echo everything that has been said in terms of communication, and of course, there will be things in the contract which would allow to kind of specify how do you deal with disputes. But the hope is that you wouldn't be getting there at that stage. You'd be having a lot of discussions, try to work through the issues without even having to kind of look at dispute resolution or escalation, even that you deal with it between the project teams. And I think in terms of, obviously a lot of these deals are based on kind of financial milestones, and I've seen it in the past where maybe an academic partner kind of hasn't met that milestone, and the kind of industry partner kind of goes, well, kind of you're not going to get your money then. It's kind of like, well, that's going to definitely stifle the onward research because they, it's not their fault, that things may not have gone to plan. So don't kind of just withdraw the funding, kind of think, okay, how can we work together? Maybe a little bit more funding might be worthwhile, even if you haven't met that milestone. Obviously that won't be appropriate in all circumstances, but other ways of dealing with it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're at the end of the panel discussion. We've been able to cover from courting to separation, or at least the planning of that. Thank you very much.